It's dark.
I'll probably stand crooked, so it'll all even out in the end. Everybody should be taking out their phone and adding me to everything on social media. I'm very lonely. I spend all day in front of the computer. I have no friends. Everyone's really quiet. I feel like I should start.
Great idea.
You want to start?
Yes.
That didn't sound very enthusiastic.
Yeah! Start it up! Break it, baby!
There we go. All right, how's everybody feeling tonight?
Fantastic.
No. I want everybody to say weird. How you feeling tonight?
Weird.
There we go. It's gonna be weird, I promise. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Tim Weisberg. I'm the host of Spooky Southcoast on WBSM and some other things. How many folks have heard of Spooky Southcoast before? That's like a record number. We've been on the air for 18 years and I don't get that many people in a room raising their hand. Actually, I've actually done presentations where I've had like family members, my own parents right in front of the room. Who listens to Spooky Southcoast? And they're like, Mom, Dad, come on. They're like, well, we don't listen. We hear you talk enough. Why would we listen to you on the radio?
Ouch.
But I started that show in 2006 on WBSM. I was doing a sports show over there called The Locker Room. And those of you who have read the Standard Times for a number of years, you remember I used to write a wrestling column in the Standard Times. And because of that, they reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to come on and do a wrestling report on this sports show when it was debuting. At the time, wrestling was hugely popular, so it was kind of a popular segment of the show. They kept me around as a co-host, and then one day Pete Braley called me and said, "We really like what you do on that show. Would you like to talk about some other things on the radio?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'd love to talk about the paranormal." And he said, like, ghosts and aliens and stuff? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, when do you want to do it? And I looked at my schedule and I said, well, the only thing that really fit in is Saturday nights at 10 p.m. And he said, oh yeah, that's fine. Because, that's like radio graveyard time, and there's nothing really on, so it's the perfect time for talking about the paranormal. So that debuted in 2006. We started doing it as a podcast right away, too. That was a newfangled thing that people didn't really know how to do yet, but we figured it out. We got it up on the internet, and the first week we were getting hundreds of downloads from places like Japan and Kazakhstan and all these different countries. And I said, wow, people really care about the ghosts in our little corner of the world. I didn't realize at that time it was probably just a bunch of bots that were downloading it, but whatever. I still like to think that we're popular in Kazakhstan. So that actually led to me getting the chance to do some other things in paranormal radio. Did anybody ever listen to Art Bell on the old Coast to Coast AM show that was on overnights? He left that show and he started the Dark Matter Digital Network online. And he picked Spooky Southcoast to be one of the shows on that network. And then when he stepped down from that show, eventually my friend Dave Schrader took over. And Dave asked me to be his fill-in host. And when Dave's show, the Loser Files, started filming more episodes, I ended up taking over as the permanent host. That lasted for about 4 months until some people came in and bought the network and summarily fired me because I wasn't going to push their conspiracy theory agenda. But that's okay, because I transitioned that then into starting my own online network, Midnight FM, and my Midnight Society show, which in just a couple of years, we've kind of stopped doing that show now because after the pandemic and after lockdowns, people were back to their regular lives and nobody was really listening live anymore. But we did about 300 or 400 shows with that show, and I've done about almost 800 with Spooky Southcoast in 18 years. So, just those 2 years doing it 5 nights a week, we were almost able to catch up with that. And you can get it in all those places, so hopefully you'll check it out. My work in paranormal radio led to me deciding to join up with my friend Jeff Belanger, who you've probably seen talk about ghosts in different places, and he's a big researcher for the show Ghost Adventures. And he and I started a company called Legend Trips, where we would go out and investigate historic haunted places, because we realized that when people go out and do these ghost events, they would have all these paranormal TV stars, and everybody would get so wrapped up in getting autographs and hanging out with the famous people. And here you are, one of the most haunted places in the world, and you care more about this person protocols for some of these places. We did multiple events at Fort Taylor until the city solicitor told us we couldn't do them anymore because it was too dangerous. They weren't wrong. It was very dangerous, but we make everybody sign a waiver. We've done the Lizzie Borden House multiple times. We've done, what else here locally? The Fear and Tavern in Wareham, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So my work in researching haunted locations and my time, my episode that I did of Ghost Adventures in the Lizzie Borden House, I got to know Nick Brock from that show. And so when he was starting the show Ghost Stalkers, he reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to be the writer or the researcher for that show. That was my first job ever working in television, and I can tell you it was also the best I ever got paid. All the years I've worked in paranormal TV since, my paycheck has gone significantly down from show to show. That's just how TV works. When I went from working on Ghost Stalkers, which was the 6 best episodes of paranormal TV you've probably never seen, to working on a show called Ghost Asylum. Yes, that is the show where they tried to trap a ghost at the end of every episode, including the time they tried to use a screen door, which I don't know how that was supposed to work. I had nothing to do with the traps, I just researched the locations. And then they transitioned that show into Haunted Towns, which became a focus on towns where there were multiple haunted locations and where the stories might all kind of connect. So I got to help develop that show and worked on it as a producer. And I really am proud of the first season of that show. I didn't work on the second season, so anything they did in that, you can't blame me for. And then that led to me getting the chance to work in front of the camera on a couple of shows. Hotel Paranormal, which was produced by a Canadian company and aired on the Travel Channel. Because they were Canadian and they had connections, they got Dan Aykroyd to be the narrator of that show. So Dan Aykroyd is telling you about the ghosts of this hotel in San Antonio, and then I come on and be like, the reason why hotels are haunted. But the important thing is, people will ask me all the time, did you get to work with Dan Aykroyd? And I say, no, I never met the guy. He did his narration later. But the important thing is we do share a credit now on IMDb. So as far as I'm concerned, that makes me pretty much an official Ghostbuster. And then I also got to work on a show called Famously Haunted Amityville. I've been obsessed with that case since I was about 11 years old, and I picked up the Amityville horror paperback at a yard sale on the Cape. And I've looked at it from every angle. I've had so many guests on my radio show, including one of the children that lived in the house, one of the Love's family members. And I've just been obsessed with it. And these TV producers realized that I had an obsession based on some of our Spooky Southcoast YouTube videos and brought us down to Amityville. And they said, you get to investigate the house. And I said, wow, that's awesome. Nobody's investigated the house since Lorraine Warren back in the 70s. And they said, well, except you don't actually get to go in the house. You can investigate outside the house. Oh, well, still we get to go in the yard, right? No, you have to stay on the street. And then when we get there, there's signs on the street that say no stopping. Keep moving. Do not park here. No photos. So Stephanie Burke, who is a local person, and she's a psychic medium, and my best friend, we do all this stuff together. We're driving around in this rented SUV. We rented a white Ford SUV because we said maybe people will think we're cops and will let us stay there a little bit longer. And so we'd be parked for a few minutes trying to investigate a little bit, doing some experiments, and a car would come up and be like, oh, you better move. And this went on for 2 days. At the end of the third day, it was the wrap of filming. We're having a little party with the producers in the hotel bar, and I'm telling them the story about how we kept moving. And the lead producer looks at me and goes, oh, I'm sorry, we should have mentioned. We got special permission from the police for you to stay parked outside the whole time. I'm like, great, now you tell me. So I'm hoping that they do a sequel, but nothing so far. So tonight we're going to talk about Paranormal 101. How many folks here have investigated paranormal before? How many people have at least looked into it and researched it, but then decided they might be able to do it quicker? How many people know nothing about the paranormal and are here and will believe everything that I say for the next hour? You're okay. So if we're going to start talking about the paranormal, then let's talk a little bit about what drives a lot of people into the paranormal, and that's fear. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. And that's why we really want to look into the paranormal for 2 reasons. One, we don't know what happens to us when we die. And by the way, when I say the paranormal tonight, we're going to be talking mostly about ghosts. It doesn't apply to all the things like UFOs and cryptids, but that would be like Paranormal 102, Paranormal 103. Request that they bring me back every year, and we'll take care of all of that. But this is, more when it comes to ghosts. We want to know what happens to us when we die. And And so that unknown of that is part of what drives it. But the other part of it is a lot of us know that this stuff happens, but we have no idea why. So that unknown is a big driving factor for a lot of people. So what is fear? This is I hate being that guy. Well, the Oxford Dictionary defines fear as, what it defines fear as, a distressing emotion aroused by impending danger, evil, pain, etc., whether the threat is real or imagined. And the reason why fear comes into a lot of paranormal investigations is because of that phrase, whether the threat is real or imagined. I've never really been on a paranormal investigation where I felt that I was in danger of something from the paranormal side of things. I felt like I was in danger because the place might not have been safe, or there might have been some people around that shouldn't have been there. There was a time that I was investigating Battery Milliken at Fort Taber, and I thought that the roof had caved in on us while we were, in this underground tunnel. Thankfully, it was just ghostly cannon fire. Oh, thank God, it was just a ghost. But that's the thing, is you start to think about what could happen, and that's going to psych you out and fear and make you afraid. I wrote an article once called The Thrill of the Chill for the Standard Times, and I interviewed a psychologist. And he said, the biggest part of fear and the strongest part of fear is anticipatory fear. And you have to look at it like this. The worst ghost that you can imagine is always going to be worse than the worst ghost that you can encounter. So it's always going to be worse in your mind than it will ever be in real life. Kind of like when you went out and you tried Sonic for the first time. So, anybody here work at Sonic? All right. That joke sometimes does not go over well.
Don't ever.
So what is a ghost? I think it's important that we define this before we talk about how to look for them. And so I'm just going to ask the question.
Can you see that?
What is a ghost?
What is a ghost?
And I think if you ask most people, that would be their definition. Some people might also say that this is a ghost. But I can tell you that in all of my experiences in the paranormal, I have never seen a ghost that looks like that. And I kind of feel bad for Casper because I think he had like encephalitis or something. Big for his body. Like if he was alive and tried to stand up, besides the fact that his feet are kind of sewn to his body, but he would just fall over all the time from being tired. But yes, that's the answer that a lot of people would give, that a ghost is a disembodied soul. But I don't know that I'm ready to believe that idea because I don't know that I believe in the idea of a soul. I don't mean to insult anybody if you're spiritual, but I am not. And so for me, the idea of having this other version of ourselves that goes off somewhere else, I don't know if I really believe in that yet. I do believe in the idea of having a consciousness outside of our physical body that can be connected with other consciousness, but I don't know if I buy into all of kind of the dogmatic parts of what a soul would be. So, but that is, in a lot of cultures around the world, every culture has a word for ghost, and almost every culture would define a ghost as being a disembodied soul. But another way that a ghost can exist is through a psychological imprint. This is the energy that we leave behind, the energetic signature that we imprint on a location. So, I like to tell people as an example for this, if you just walk into a room where two people were arguing, but nobody was saying anything, but you walk in and you're like, ooh, what went on in here? You can kind of feel that kind of baked into the room. And that's a psychological imprint. Normally, after a short amount of time, they dissipate, but sometimes something happens in a location that's so tragic, or so positive, or what it might be, that it leaves that imprint. Another idea is that a ghost could be a thought form, or what the Tibetans call tulpas, or what some people refer to as egregores. And the idea behind this is that this is a ghost that we create with our own mind. That we are going into these places that we think are haunted, and if enough people go there and start thinking about it being haunted, it becomes haunted. I use the Lizzie Borden House as an example for that because prior to it opening up as a bed and breakfast in 1996, there weren't a lot of ghost reports coming out of it. But when it opened up to the public and everybody's coming in and they're talking about murder and people are walking around saying, gee, if any place would be haunted, it's this place, they're kind of pointing out that intention. I'm not saying that that explains the ghosts there, but that can explain ghosts in a lot of places. And people get upset when I say that this is one of my favorite theories for ghosts. They say, well, but that seems kind of shortchanging what a ghost could be if it could be us coming back from the dead. And I look at it like this. This means that we're using, if we're all in a room and we're saying to the ghost, can you close that door behind us? And all of a sudden that door closes, well, it wasn't some third-party ghost that came on and did it. It was all of us putting our intention out there and using that 90% of our brains that we don't use to make that door shut on its own. And I think that that's super cool. And I think that that has a lot of potential for human evolution. And I think that that means I would much rather be sitting on the couch and thinking, I can make that remote come into my hand like a Jedi rather than get up, than to think that my dead grandmother can see me when I'm in the shower. Another idea is that a ghost could be a time slip or a quantum event. Is anybody here a quantum physicist? No? Okay.
I dabble.
Well, I was going to say, one of these days I'm going to ask that question and Neil deGrasse Tyson will be in the back and I'll be like, well, actually, Tim. And then I'll be like, oh man, I'm screwed. I've actually interviewed him twice, and both times we argued about whether or not ghosts exist. Naturally, he handed me my ass. He's Neil deGrasse Tyson. But the idea of, we'll get into quantum theory in just a second, but the idea of a time slip is something we've all experienced. We've all gone through it. It's a very simple thing, deja vu. We've all had that where we say, wait a minute, this happened before. Or I feel like I've been in this position again. Well, that's a little bit of a momentary time slip. There's a story about a person who was driving to a destination, and as he was driving to that destination, he drove through a town he had drove through tons of times. And the downtown area, when he got there, didn't look like he remembered it. It looked like something from out of the 1800s. And he said, wow, they've really redone everything to look historic since the last time I came through. And then he went on to his destination, did what he had to do, and when he came back through that downtown area to head back home, it looked like the way it always had been. And he realized that what actually happened is he had kind of taken a step back in time and fell into the 1800s briefly. And this is what could explain a lot of the ghosts that we encounter. So if you're sitting in your living room and there's a Revolutionary War soldier that walks through your living room, that could be a time slip. It doesn't mean that that ghost is still here present. It means that for some reason, 1776 is rubbing up against 2023. How can that happen? Well, now we've got to get into quantum theory. Quantum theory believes in the idea of the multiverse, and not the Marvel multiverse, and certainly not the DC movie multiverse, but the actual idea that there are multiple versions of the universe happening simultaneously, and that they're all rubbing up against each other. And I look at it like this. Every eventuality is a reality. Every choice that you have made still exists out there, even if you didn't make that choice. So when you got up for breakfast this morning, did you have a choice between a couple of things?
Yeah.
All right, so give me two things you could have chosen between.
A muffin or a bagel?
A muffin or a bagel?
Yeah.
What did you have?
A bagel.
All right, so you had a bagel this morning, but in another version of reality, you had a muffin.
Yeah.
Now, that same day might have gone on and been exactly the same way, and you still might have been sitting here, you just pulled a muffin instead of bagel. But instead, you just started the day with a different choice. Or you could have branched off in an entirely different reality, and who knows, you could not be the president of the United States. So you made the wrong choice. Always go with the money. But the idea is that all these different versions of the universe could rub up against each other, and that we could see into those universes, and that's why we're encountering a ghost. Which is funny, because that means if we see them and they look like ghosts to us, that means we look like ghosts to them. And people say, well, we're looking back at somebody dressed in colonial garb. Well, imagine what they're thinking about when they see the way that we're dressed in 2023. What are those things in their faces? Why do they have all those markings in their body? The bottom line is that ghosts are energy. One of the first two laws of thermodynamics says that energy, one of these days I'll look that up, says that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only be changed. The energy that makes us up when we die, it doesn't die with us, it goes off and forms bonds with other energy. But maybe for some reason it retains our form and kind of continues on as us. So my friend Jeff has this great quote, a ghost is a path to our past, a connection to our fellow human beings in our present, and a way to ponder our own inevitable future. That sounds like a really, really intelligent, heavy thing to say, right? Well, that's the guy that said it right there. And Jeff is actually the person getting picked. The picker is my friend Matt Moniz, who co-hosts Spooky Southcoast with me. He is a Harvard-trained chemist. So, I don't know what experiment he's doing there. So really the bottom line here is that ghosts are the story of us. That's why we look into the paranormal, because we want to think that there's more for us, whether it be us individually or us all together as a species. So then why are there ghosts? Well, one of the reasons is history. We're keeping history alive. And the reason why we go to a lot of these historic places is because, yes, there may be a ghost there that we can identify. Every place suffers from what I call most famous ghost syndrome. If they have a sign out of this bed and breakfast that says George Washington slept here, which every New England bed and breakfast probably has that sign, even if they were built in like the 1950s. If you did sleep there and somebody has even the slightest bit of a paranormal experience there, we're going to automatically say it must be George Washington. But it probably isn't. But we have that most famous ghost syndrome because we want to be connected to our past. We want to be connected to that history. Another reason is our geography. So where we live kind of helps us be a giant paranormal battery. We live alongside the ocean. Water charges up paranormal activity. We have a lot of running water with creeks and rivers and all of that. That helps charge up paranormal activity. There's a lot of water running underneath us. That will help charge things up. We also live on a shelf of granite. And that granite is rich in quartz. In fact, when somebody says to me, Tim, I think my house is haunted, my first question is always, well, what do you want me to do? But my second question is always, what is your home made, what is your home's foundation made of? If you have a basement, can you go down there, can you take a look, and can you tell me what it is? And around here, most of the time, it's probably granite, which has quartz in it, and you can shine your flashlight and see all the quartz. Or if it's an older house, it's probably fieldstone, which will be made up of granite, which will have quartz in it. And quartz is piezoelectric. That means that it records and amplifies energy. It's why we use it in wristwatches, why we use it in electronic devices. And it also means that our homes are basically one giant paranormal battery and recorder. So anything that happens in our homes energetically is being recorded and stored. It's called the stone tape theory. And it's actually a prevalent reason why we think so many homes are haunted. So we have a lot of that going for us as well. And the other part about our geography too is when you think about how we're kind of a little bit isolated. Massachusetts, especially the South Coast area, we stick out a bit. And at a time when it would have been harder to come out to this area, when there weren't highways and roads, that kind of gave us a little bit of isolationism, and that kind of helped our ghosts to grow. Another reason is environmental factors. Like I said, we have not only all of those things geographically, we have a lot of storms. That's going to help charge things up. We have a lot of wind with nor'easters and hurricanes. That's going to help to charge things up. We're in a constant state of flux, and that flux is going to help feed into paranormal activity. Anytime that there's something that's different, ghosts like to act up. That's why when somebody's doing a renovation of their home, they'll usually get a lot of paranormal activity. If their home is haunted, they'll get more activity during those renovations because ghosts just don't like change. And another reason why is because of the people. We're a big melting pot around here of all different cultures, and every one of those cultures brings in their own beliefs, brings in their own taboos, their own superstitions, and we kind of absorb all of them. So here you have, the Puritans coming in and saying that believing in ghosts or anything like that would be believing in the devil, and that would be wrong. But yet they would also have protection prayers that they would do and sigils that would draw on the walls to protect them from those ghosts that they claimed didn't exist. So let's go all the way back now in some of the history of talking about ghosts. And before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between ghost truth and ghost legend. Let me take a sip of water. There's a movie that I love to cite to kind of help explain this. How many folks here have seen The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance? All right, good. So I won't bore you with the synopsis if you've already seen it. This movie is from the 1960s, and it's about a lawyer from Connecticut at the time of the Old West, except back then it wasn't the Old West, it was still new. But a lawyer from Connecticut played by Jimmy Stewart, who moves out to the West, and he runs afoul of the outlaw Liberty Valance. And Liberty Valance challenges him to a gunfight, and Jimmy Stewart's supposed to have this gunfight, but he doesn't know how to even shoot a gun. So the aging gunfighter played by John Wayne is going to help train him up to have this duel. And when it comes time for the gunfight to take place, Jimmy Stewart can't pull the trigger. John Wayne pulls out his gun. He shoots Liberty Valance, but everybody thinks it's Jimmy Stewart that does it. So for decades, he lives in town as the man who shot Liberty Valance. And the idea of the movie is that he's telling his newspaper editor the real story on the eve of him getting a citation from the governor. So he's telling him the truth of what actually happened, and when he's done telling him, He says, well, are you going to print the truth now? Are you going to print what actually happened? And the newspaper editor gets up and he closes his notebook and he says, sir, this is the West. When the legend becomes fact, you print the legend. And that's kind of the way that I look at a lot of the things that we talk about in the paranormal. These legends, they might not even have any basis in truth, but it doesn't matter. They become the ghost story. So we can still look at them and examine them. It doesn't mean we have to believe them wholesale, but they still matter and they still have power. And when we go back into the past and we look at the way that some of these cultures treated ghosts, we have to keep in mind a lot of that could be legend. So let's go all the way back to ancient Egypt, when people really first started to become obsessed with the idea of death. If you look at cavemen, I don't really know a lot about caveman history. I haven't read their writings because there aren't any. I haven't listened to any of their recordings of their podcasts, those caveman podcasts they put out, Neanderthals this week. I never listened to any of those because there aren't any. So we don't know what cavemen thought. There's probably a safe bet that when Ugg the caveman keeled over and died, the other caveman just looked around and said, Ugg, oh, okay, and moved on. But then as people started to become a little bit more aware of how precious life was, they started to realize that they didn't want it to end when it was ending. And the Egyptians really celebrated the idea of death as a transition into another plane of existence. And so they wrote the Book of the Dead, which to this day a lot of people still kind of cite as being one of the first quote-unquote paranormal texts. We can move on then to ancient Greece. And in ancient Greece, we start to get some of the first ghost investigations. So there were some stories that were told at that time of a bathhouse in which there was a ghost that would haunt that bathhouse. And the reason why people thought there was a ghost is because if you went around at night when people were at this bathhouse, you would hear a bunch of low moaning sounds coming from the bathhouse. Now anybody that knows anything about ancient Greece and the bathhouses that were going on, it wasn't a ghost that was making those moans. But they still were looking into this as a possibility. And so Pliny the Younger is one of the first to start writing about some of these investigations, and you start to get the first recorded ghost stories. Now there's another book that is full of ghost stories, and stories about witches, and possibly even UFOs, and people get really upset when I point that out, and that book is the Bible. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that would qualify as paranormal. And I'm not talking about the miracles. Miracles are miracles. I'm not trying to dismiss those as being something else. But there's a lot of stuff in there where you say, that sounds paranormal to me. And so I think that was a time when people started to really accept some of these ideas too. But let's go all the way from the time of the Bible to 1850 Hyattsville, New York. And that is the time of the Fox sisters. The Fox sisters, there are three of them, Kate, Maggie, and Leah. Leah was the older sister, and by the time our story takes place, she had already moved out of the house and was married. But Kate and Maggie lived in the house in this cottage, this cabin with their parents. And one night they're in their room and they start hearing all these mysterious knocks happening on the walls. And they ask who might be making those knocks, and they work out kind of a bit of a spelling system, a communication system, where it will tap for the number of letters and its name, and they spell out his name, which turns out to be Mr. Splitfoot, which is another name for the devil. But the way that they got the story going when they started getting more answers from the spirit is that he was the spirit of a peddler who had come to the cabin before they had lived there, and the people who had lived there had murdered him, and they had buried him under the foundation of the cabin. Anyway, the Fox sisters become a sensation. People line up to see them utilize their mediumship abilities here and to communicate with spirits. They end up going on tour. They play some of the biggest theaters in America and some of the biggest theaters in the world. They give birth to a movement, which we'll get into in a minute. But decades later, after they've gone through all of the circuit and done all these shows and made a significant amount of money doing it, one of the sisters developed a drinking problem. And one night after a show that they'd done, I believe at Carnegie Hall, a newspaper reporter comes up and says, well, come on, this is all just bunk, right? And because she's a little bit hammered, she's like, oh yeah, it's all just fun. We're doing it this way, we're doing it that way. So he writes this big expose story the next day in the newspaper about how the Fox sisters pulled off this great scam and spiritualism isn't real and there are no ghosts and all of that. Well, she ended up recanting her story the next day after she sobered up and said, I didn't mean any of that. I was just drunk and having a conversation with this guy. But that didn't matter. Nobody listened to the recant of the story, they only listened to that original story. And so the Fox sisters kind of fell out of favor after that. But spiritualism didn't really fall out of favor until the 1920s. So we had a very long, prolonged period of time when many Americans were having seances in their living rooms like it was just a regular Saturday night activity. And the reason why was because at this time we had the Civil War going on, and then everything that happened after that. So many young men were dying in that war, and people were losing their loved ones right and left, and they had to feel like there was some sort of sense of closure, so the idea of a medium coming in and having a seance would help give them some of that closure. Now the problem was there were a lot of frauds that came out and kind of took advantage of people's grief, and used a lot of parlor tricks. That's where the term parlor tricks comes from, because they would be in the parlor having seances, and they would be doing things like swallowing cheesecloth, and then regurgitating it later and calling it ectoplasm from the ghosts. Now, I don't know how much money these mediums made for these seances they held, but no amount of money is going to get me to swallow some cheesecloth, keep it in my throat for a while, talk to you and say, oh, hello, yes, I love a cup of tea, hang out for a while and say, all right, let's get this seance started. Like, I don't think any amount of money would get me to be able to do that. But that's one of the many tricks that they used. They would also do things like knocking their knees under the table to make it sound like rappings on the table. Or some could pop their toes. And many of the Fox sisters are doing just that. That's how they would, get these knocks in these great halls, these giant halls with no microphones, no electric amplification. Everybody could hear these knocking sounds, but yet that's somebody cracking their toes on the stage 100 yards away. So there were people that were frauds, but there were people that were doing this with the best of intentions. In fact, they even had seances in the White House. Abraham Lincoln is said to have actually sat at the table and taken part in those seances. But as this is getting popular, there's also those in the scientific community who want to look into this from a scientific perspective. And so you have organizations like the Ghost Club that formed in the 1860s in London and still exists to this day. And in fact, it was my distinct honor to get to join the Ghost Club a couple of years ago. There was a rigorous process. They reached out to me and said, we would love to have you join the Ghost Club because of all your work and the paranormal. And I said, no, the honor would be all mine. And they put me through this rigorous process, and I'm just kidding, none of that actually happened. I just went online and I paid $35 and they sent me a membership card. That's all it takes. And you can sign up for, I think, $50 or $70. They send you a journal every month. And you're invited to the monthly meeting, which is in London. So one of these days I'll go. But the Ghost Club started looking into things from a scientific perspective, and that really kind of started what we do now as paranormal research. Anybody know who this guy is?
Harry Houdini.
All right. Harry Houdini, who is probably the man who single-handedly took down the spiritualist movement. And by the way, it became a religion. Spiritualism went beyond just people communicating with ghosts in their living room. It became their belief system. And we have spiritualist camps that popped up all over America. I've actually been to Lillygate, which is the biggest one. It's such a great place. It's amazing. When you go there, I'm not Mr. Love and Light at all, but when you go there, you're like, oh, I get it now. I get why people feel that. But we also have remote. Onset in Wareham was a spiritualist camp, and they still have a spiritualist church community there. They have the wigwam where they do ceremonies. So if you want to learn more about spiritualism, you can go to any one of their ceremonies on a Sunday, any one of their services on a Sunday, and these services are literally, everybody gets together in the church, and mediums go up and they channel deceased loved ones and pass on messages. So Houdini lost his mother, and he was devastated by the loss, and he had an arrangement with her that if she passed on, she would try to reach out to him and communicate with him. And so when she died, all these mediums were like, we can help you talk to your mother. So he hired one of them to try to do so, and he thought something was up because the mother was communicating with them in English and his mother only knew Hungarian. So he thought that that was a sign that the medium was a thing. Now, we've come to learn through paranormal research, you don't have to know the language of the ghost, and the ghost doesn't have to know your language. There's some sort of thing that happens in the translation where if people go and investigate in France, they might get EVPs, electronic voice phenomenon, that's in English. It happens all the time. I've also been here in America, and I've gotten EVPs in Portuguese. So it really doesn't have any rhyme or reason. So it's not a good enough reason for him to have taken down this medium, but he started researching how these fakes were pulling off these tricks. He put on a stage show where people could come and see him doing those tricks. It didn't last very long, unfortunately, for a variety of different reasons. So then he took all that information and he put it out in a pamphlet that he gave away to people because he didn't want to see anybody else get conned by these mediums. And at the time, he was battling his best friend over this, who was a true believer in the idea of spiritualism and mediumship. And that best friend was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote all the Sherlock Holmes books. So they were kind of at odds over spiritualism. But it still does exist to this day, even if it's not as popular as it once was. So Harry Houdini kind of killed some of that momentum for this. But in the 1930s, we have a gentleman who comes along that reinvigorates paranormal research and actually takes it into the mass media, which is why he is one of my heroes. I'm sorry, I almost skipped right over Charles Fort. My fault. Sorry, Charles. He's making that face because I almost skipped over him. Charles Fort is kind of the whole reason we do what we do too, because paranormal research is what we call Fortean research. We're researching Fortean phenomena. We have named this stuff because of the stigma that might come with the name paranormal. We have named this stuff after him because he was one of the first to start documenting this in a serious way in his book called The Book of the Damned, which you can get in bookstores to this day. They might even have a copy at the library. It has a lot of stories of things like the Great Meat Shower, the Great Frog Shower, raining frogs, raining fish, raining meat, all of these different things that rain down from the sky, and numerous other anomalous phenomena. And so Ford really started putting all that together and saying, and taking the approach of saying, I'm only telling you what happened based on the reports that I have from witnesses. You can make up your own mind what you want to believe in. And that's what real paranormal research has to be. Because we don't have the answers, so all we can do is tell you what's happened to us, or what's happened to other people, and then it's up to you to make up your mind what you want to believe. Okay, now let's get into Harry Price. Harry Price was going out and researching different haunted locations in England, and one of those places was the Borley Rectory. And he realized that it was probably one of the most haunted places in England. And he also realized that the new medium of radio might be a good way to share this story. So they worked it out so that they would do live radio broadcasts from Borley Rectory during his paranormal investigations. So he's a big hero of mine, not only for the way that he approached investigating, but also because he was the first guy to talk about ghosts on the radio, and I wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't for him. So when people say, oh, who's your favorite paranormal investigator? Is it Zach Higgins? Is it Jason Grant? Is it Josh Gates? I'm like, no, it's Harry Price. And most people say, ooh. But I'm just going to give you an idea of why Harry Price might not be as popular in this dynamic based on this newsreel footage. I'm not going to play the whole thing. It's 10 minutes long.
Holding hands in the dark, singing hymns, and getting touch.
I'm sorry, Harry.
Irrelevant.
Kind of put me to sleep there.
But in this popular opinion, though they can't be
So he's certainly not as dynamic as Zach Higgins. I don't think Harry Price ever took off his shirt and ran into a haunted place and started yelling, come at me, ghosts! But Harry Price gave way to the next generation of paranormal investigators, kind of led at the forefront by Hans Holzer. Hans Holzer created what is called the Holzer method of investigating. If you watch the show The Holzer Files, you're probably familiar with this idea. But he said, I'm going to take the scientific side of things, or the pseudoscientific side of things, and I'm going to pair that with a trance medium. And we're going to go out together and investigate. We're going to compare and contrast the results that we get. And that's a lot of what we do now. So I go out on investigations, and I use all different kinds of devices. Really not so much anymore, but I did for a long time. But I always had Stephanie with me on these investigations because she's a psychic medium, and so she can kind of help not only verify the things I'm getting on the devices, but she can also lead us in the right direction for investigation. So Hans Holzer was a man who was not short on ego. And in the later years of his life, Before he passed away, I reached out to him to ask him if he would come on Spooky Southcoast. And I'm not going to try to do Hamza's accent, but I said to him, you know, Dr. Holzer, it's an honor to talk to you. He's like, yes, yes, of course it is. I said, I would love to have you come on my radio show. And he says, well, tell me about your radio station. How many people are listening to you? And I said, well, we're a small station in New Bedford, Massachusetts, actually Fairhaven. And we have about 1,000 watts on a Saturday night. And maybe people are hearing us, I don't know, like maybe 20,000 people. I'm just guessing. And he's like, no, I talk to audiences much bigger than that. I don't get out of my couch for less than 50,000 people. I'm like, I don't know any place you've gone to that's had 50,000 people. What are you, the Pope at Madison Square Garden? But whatever. So I was just honored to have had a conversation or two with him on the phone. His daughter has come on our show many times. She's great. But he kind of was the vanguard of the paranormal of that era. You wouldn't have heard of Ed and Lorraine Warren if it wasn't for Hans Holzer getting on television. And that's when you got the beginnings of all those shows in the 70s, like In Search of. Kids, if you've never seen In Search of, go find it. It's on YouTube. I'm talking about the original one with Leonard Nimoy, not the reboot with Zachary Quinto. And it really is the first time this stuff was presented on television in a way that people took it seriously. So now we can talk more about paranormal television, and we got to go into 2004 with the launch of Ghost Hunters. At the time, there had been a lot of shows that dealt in paranormal. X-Files was very popular. Fact or Fake, I think, was already on. Beyond Belief. Shows like that looked at the paranormal, but kind of left open the possibility that either it's fictional or that people are mistaken about things. But it was always these experts that they talked to. All these, the Hans Holzers, the Lloyd Auerbachs, the Ed and Lorraine Warrens, the John Zappases. It wasn't everyday people. And what's interesting about Ghost Hunters is it's a show about two plumbers who are also paranormal investigators. And so I realized watching this, like, oh, wait a minute. Regular everyday people can do this too. Now, there's a lot of paranormal investigators that when you ask them, well, how long have you been doing this for? How long have you been investigating the paranormal? And they're going to tell you, oh, the common answer, everyone will tell you, I've been doing this for 30 years. It's like always 30 years, no matter what. And I would say, but you're only 24. The correct answer when you ask most paranormal investigators, how long have you been doing this for? The real answer that they should be telling you is since the first time they watched Ghost Hunters. Because that's what really led to a lot of people getting out there and doing this for themselves. They realized that everyday people can look for ghosts. And that, of course, led to other shows like Ghost Adventures, Destination Fear, now that's Project Fear, Destination Truth, what else? Ghost Lab, Ghost Everything, Haunted Everything. If you come up with a name, there's a show. There was actually a show called Ghost Bait, where they put somebody in a room alone with a bag over their head and said, all right, go get them, ghosts. And that show got canceled pretty quickly. And then just to show you how crazy paranormal TV is, they brought it back a couple of years later and gave it a full season. Like, no idea is too stupid in the paranormal world. So now let's talk about some of the tools of the trade if you are going to go out there and do this for yourself. Now, people will ask me all the time, what is the best thing that you can bring on a paranormal investigation? And it sounds stupid and it sounds cliche, but the correct answer is an open mind. Really, just go there not thinking that you're going to have a ghost experience, but also not thinking that everything is not a ghost either. Just go there, be in the moment, experience it, try to debunk it if you can, but also keep in mind that this is one time, one experience out of a bigger story that people have been telling for a long time. So I never really liked that format of shows like Ghost Hunters, where they would go and investigate somebody's house one time, and then they would say to them, well, this place isn't haunted. Well, how do you know? Maybe the ghost just didn't want to come out while you were here. My favorite story, I'll burn this recording when you're done showing it to somebody. Don't anybody tell them that I told this story. But when Jason and Brant went to the Lizzie Borden house to investigate, they always made it seem like they had done like days and days of investigation. They drove from Warwick to Fall River. They set everything up. They spent about 45 minutes investigating to get the footage they needed. They packed everything up. They went home. So of course nothing happened to them that night. And really, if you watch their actual paranormal investigation, you're going to see 8 or 9 hours of people sitting around in the dark with nothing happening. So that for 10 seconds, everybody's watching something light up. That's the truth of paranormal investigation. The other question people will ask me is, what's the best piece of advice what's the best device that was created for hunting ghosts? And the answer is none of them. Because really everything that we're using isn't made to find and detect a ghost, because we don't know what a ghost is. What it's doing is it's detecting and documenting the environmental changes that we think that are happening. So when a ghost is manifesting, what do people say? What do they commonly report? Oh, I feel a cold spot. It just got very cold. Well, that's because drawing in that energy is an endothermic reaction. It's pulling in that heat energy in order to increase the electromagnetic field, which is why we use EMF meters to detect what's changing in the EMF field. It doesn't mean that the ghost is actually doing that. It means that it's causing an environmental change that we're documenting. And so a lot of these devices that we'll talk about are for that very purpose. So let's take a look at some of them. Some of them I have here. Some of the oldest things that people use are these things. And you can play with this stuff afterwards if you want to. So who knows what these are?
1,000.
No, these are party favorites for New Year's Eve. Happy New Year! No, these are dowsing rods. And what are dowsing rods used to find? Water. I love when people say that, not ghosts. But the idea is the same. Because the dowsing rods supposedly are influenced by the ionic energy of the water, the idea is that the ghost can do the same thing. So people will stand there in a place that's supposedly haunted, and I'm just going to demonstrate, so this isn't real, don't get freaked out. But they'll say, you know, if there's a spirit here, can you show us what a yes would be? And maybe the rods will go out like that. And say, okay, bring them back to center. And you got to hold them loosely. You don't want to be holding them like I am. And then you say, well, show us what a no is. And maybe they cross. And now you've established kind of a baseline of communication, and you can ask questions, or you can ask it to spell out letters. And I know people who get some phenomenal stuff out of these. All I know that I get out of it is hand clamps. Like I'll stand there and then I can't keep my hands steady, so I'm like the waiter in Tomb Raider that walks around carrying a tray of labs. Yeah, video game nerds get that. Another way that people would do dowsing for ghosts is with a pendulum. Kind of the same idea. So a pendulum will hang on a chain or a rope. And you'll ask the same thing, you know, show us yes, and maybe it'll go like this. Show us no, and maybe it'll go like that. Or you can put it over a Ouija board and have it spell out letters. Or you can just write letters on a piece of paper and have it spell out letters. So these are very good to try to use as well. You have to have a steady hand, and I would recommend getting one. I got this one in Salem for $12. But get one that has a heavy base on it so that it takes a little force to move it, and you know it's not just you letting it sway in the wind. But we've also moved on to some more sophisticated equipment. As I mentioned, and I say sophisticated kind of in air quotes, because as I mentioned, we're measuring the electromagnetic field. And one of the devices that was created to do that is the K2 meter. These things are kind of junk. Like, they're sloppily put together. They cost about $20, and they get a lot of false positives. So anything electric is going to set that, like, if you look, it's going off. I don't even know what's setting it up. But anything electronic is going to set it up. Anything with an electromagnetic pulse to it. So people will have their cell phones on. When you're investigating, you have your cell phone on you, and use your cell phone. Use your voice recorder. Use your camera. You can do everything you need to do with your cell phone. Just put it in airplane mode, so you don't get any stray signals, and it doesn't influence devices like this. But you can get some pretty intense communication back and forth, asking something to light it up all the way to red when it's not lighting up anyway. And you can also use it to get a good baseline sweep of where some of the EMF might be in a place. These things were so cheaply made that when they first came out, they wouldn't stay down on the button. You had to hold it down the whole time. And if you're holding it down and you're moving it around like this, you're going to make it light up on its own, because it's just so cheaply made. So people were taking a quarter and putting that in there to hold it down. And so finally the inventor was like, maybe I should make it so that the button stays down. And I can charge $15 more for that model. And so that came about. But now, you know, you can get them on eBay, you can get them on Amazon, and all that. Another device that does something similar, well, what we'll also use is an infrared thermometer. So what this will do is this will find those cold spots. So if somebody's like, it's really cold over here. Okay, well, if I come over there and I'm running over to where it's cold, and I go like, where? I just brought all my heat energy over there, and I might make that get covered up. But if I stand over here with this thermometer, and I point at it and I say, well, Joe, you're registering at 67 degrees, but right next to you is registering at 57 degrees, I know there is a cold spot. But this device was created to measure both at the same time. This is a Mel meter, and this is a little bit better than using a K2 meter because it has a sensor at the top. Mine broke. I had to order a new one from Ghost Stop. But this sensor can detect the temperature of the electromagnetic field and give you a digital readout of it. And the reason why it's called the Mel meter is because it was invented by a man named Gary Balka, whose daughter, Mel, Melissa, had passed away. And he wanted to create this device to communicate with her. So he called it the Mel 8704. And it's because her name was Melissa, her nickname was Mel. She was born in 1987 and she died in 2004. So whenever you look at one of those, you're wondering why it's that specific model, and they're all pretty much the same thing, just with different features built into it. It's because he created it for her. Another device that we use to investigate, I'm going to do this. This is scary, right? Another device we can use is a REM pod. This will also get set off by the electromagnetic field. This is also the device that made me almost crap my pants one time. We were investigating the S.K. Pierce mansion up in Gardner, and the last time we had been there was a negative spirit that had attached itself to my friend Christy, and it really made her life hell for a couple of weeks. And it took Stephanie actually doing a lot of spiritual cleansing to get rid of this thing. They finally got rid of it, and now here we are maybe 2 or 3 years later going back for the first time, and I'm driving up with Stephanie, and I said to her, hey, what was the name of that spirit that attached itself to Christy?
no.
And she says, no, you're not going to talk to her when we go there. And so I text Christy, what was the name of that spirit that attached itself to me? And so later on, we're in this room on the 3rd floor of the mansion where the door is set to close on its own. And we thought that we had debunked that because we realized there was a little pane of glass missing from one of the windows. A breeze would come in and the door would close. So we put cardboard over it and the door stopped closing. Well, later on that night, everybody's in that room. We've got all the devices out, and I use a device called Echo Box that repeats phonetic sounds. It doesn't have any words in it. It just loops through phonetic sounds, and sometimes it goes take those and make a word. So we had all the stuff laid out. And as we're sitting there, I get the text from Christy with the name of that spirit. And Stephanie's downstairs. So I say to everybody in the room with me, do you want me to call out whoever this is? And they say, yeah, do it. So I say, Laura, are you here with us? And the minute I said that, the door slammed shut. Every device lit up full blast, and Echo Box just starts saying, Laura, 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 over and over again. The only time that I was actually like in a horror movie on a paranormal investigation. Later on that night, we drive home. It's like a 2.5-hour drive home. And Stephanie drove, so she drops me off at my house. And I'm about to get out of the car, and she says, I want you to say a protection prayer before you walk into the house because you messed with Laura. And I said, I don't really believe, that's your thing. I don't really believe in protection and all that stuff. And she said, just humor me so that nothing follows you into the house. I said, okay, fine. Nothing can follow me into the house. So I go into the house. This is in my backpack, on my back. And I walk into the front door, I walk in across the threshold and step into the living room. And as soon as I do, this thing starts going off in my backpack. Now, as you can see here, there's a recessed power button up inside that you have to reach up and press to make it go off. Is it possible that something in my backpack might have gone up in there at that exact moment and pressed that button? Maybe. Except for one thing. When I took it out, because at the time I was married and my son was young, and so I was afraid I was going to wake up the whole house, I pull it out very quickly and I go to pull out the battery, and then I realized that there was no battery in it. I had taken the battery out before I put it away like I always do, yet it was still going off anyway in my hand. Like, whoa! So yeah, I don't really use that a lot anymore, it's just for show. Some other devices that we use on investigation, this is a sound meter. So a lot of times people will record EVPs and they'll get these banging sounds on a recording and they'll say, wow, like what are these noises? These must be a ghost because I don't remember hearing it. A sound meter is good because it actually will measure if there is actual physical sound in the room, so you can kind of compare and contrast. Then, of course, we want to record for electronic voice phenomenon, these ghostly voices that are imprinted on your devices. As I said, you can use your phone's recorder for that. as long as you put it in airplane mode. But I started off with a little $20 digital recorder that I used to use for covering Patriots games and Celtics games and New Bedford High football games. I would just use that on investigations. But over time, I've upgraded to more fancy equipment. These will run a couple of $100 these days, but this one I don't think works anymore. But they will, give you really good, high-quality results. Some people like to record with this recorder called a DDR60. It's a Panasonic recorder, and they like to use that one because it has a lot of background noise in it because it's not very well filtered. I don't like noise in my recordings. I like it as pure as can be. And we're going to get into the EPs in just a moment. I promise I won't keep you too late. What time is it? I'm probably got about 15, 20 minutes. Another device that people will use is a laser bridge. Maybe this will work tonight. It wasn't working great last time. All right, so you can kind of see that a little bit, right?
Yep.
So you see how that makes like a bunch of dots on the wall? So the idea is that you shine it on the wall and maybe something walks in front of it. A lot of what we experience are shadow people, shadow figures. These shadows that they have a human shape but no features. So people will use that for that purpose. Now the problem with these little pens is you got to hold the button down and hold your hand steady. Oh, look at that, it works really well in the back. So what we started doing is we started buying hair elastics at the dollar store and putting those down to hold the button. And then we would buy chip clips and using those like for a bag of chips and use those as little pedestals. But I figured out something that works way better. And these are going to be out on the shelves around this time now, but I will wait till after Christmas when they go on clearance. This is the old lazy lights, which if you've seen these go out in front of people's houses, it just shines red or green dots on the front of their house. And it basically gives you the same thing, except it's a plug-in version. I can get it in. And then there you go. So now you have a steady light that will stay lit up the whole time, and then you can just place on the ground and not have to worry about actually holding it down. Very helpful. And then, of course, the latest and greatest piece of ghost equipment that I have is an actual PKE meter, like in Ghostbusters. So this is really helpful for sweeping for valencies. I bought this at Spirit Halloween, it's just for a Halloween costume, but it's really cool. And some of these other devices that you'll see up here, this is the Echo Box app that I use. This over here is the SLS camera system. Basically, it is an Xbox Connect camera that, because Xbox Connect is supposed to map human movement, that's what this thing is doing. It's mapping human movement. So it creates a stick figure based on where it's picking up this movement and will draw it out on the screen. And you get a lot of false positives where it'll just kind of show up out of nowhere and be in the middle of the screen and disappear. That's not necessarily a ghost, that's just because the technology is a little bit crappy. But when you can start interacting with it, that's when it gets really cool. We were investigating the Murdoch Wiki Mansion up in Winchendon, and they have a music room where they have a big piano. Next to that piano, someone caught a stick figure standing next to it, playing the violin. And so we had somebody sit down at the piano that we had to play, and started playing the piano, and this stick figure played the violin in tune as he sped up and slowed down, and was tapping his foot in time. And then it turned that violin into a floor bass, and then it turned that into a trombone, and it was playing all these instruments with Roger as he was playing the piano, which was a very cool, very profound capture. But later that night, any kids in the room? There it is. Later on that night, there was a bathtub in the basement, and this person caught a stick figure sitting in the bathtub, like with its arms on the side, and it looked like somebody else was standing over giving it a bath. And my friend is, she's got a little bit of a cutesy voice, and she's like, "Oh, are you a dirty boy? Are you getting a bath? Oh." And the more she did that, the stick figure's hand dropped below the water line and started, and moved just the right amount of space, just the right speed, she kept teasing, decided to go two-handed. And you can watch that footage on our Spooky Southcoast YouTube channel. You can actually see it and watch it for yourself. I didn't say anything to the rest of the people that were there that night. We had about 40 people there for this event. I took that footage, I went upstairs, and I put it on the big TV in the music room, and I said, I'm not going to say anything. I just want you to watch this and tell me what it is that you think you see is happening. And when I put it up there, as soon as that moment happened, the whole room just burst out in laughter. So I'm like, yeah, you guys think that's what it is too? And so everybody that watches it is like, yep, that's what he's watching. So now that I've talked about some of the equipment, let me just go through some examples of things that we have caught with that equipment. This is the Fearing Tavern in Wareham. There we go. This is the Fearing Tavern in Wareham. It was originally built in 1690. And there's a lot of stories associated with this place, but one of the stories is that there's a tunnel in the basement that's been covered over where they used to bring supplies in from the waterway across the street back at the time when the Native Americans would steal their supplies, or during the American Revolution or the War of 1812, when the British would try to commandeer their supplies. So they would sneak them in through this tunnel to get them into the tavern. And I had it in my mind that if I could prove to the Historical Society that I knew where the tunnel was in this 300-plus-year-old building, they were going to let me dig up the basement and find the tunnel. And of course they said no. But I was in the basement with a broom handle banging on the floor, and I found the hollow spot. And I said, oh, I think we found that magic spot. And it's a concrete floor that has some dirt over it. And we all started kind of moving the dirt around with our feet. I don't know what we thought we were going to do, but we were moving the dirt around. And in that sound of us shuffling our feet, a voice comes through. I'm going to play that for because there's the Class C EVP, which is where you hear it, you say, there's definitely something there, but I can't make it out. Then there's the Class B EVP, where there's definitely something there, and you might think it's one thing, and I think it's something else, and we really can't agree on it. And then there's the Class A EVP, which is where everybody that hears it knows there's something there, and they can all clearly make out what's being said. The night that we conducted this investigation, we brought along our friend Mike Markowitz, who's an EVP expert, and he put studio condenser microphones all over this place, walked around with a very expensive handheld recorder. He caught a voice of a little girl saying, "You want to play dress up?" And I would have loved to play that for you, but I also want to sleep tonight. And every time I hear that, it just freaks me out too much. But as we were recording all of this, he comes back to us the next day and says, the next week, and he says, I got 136 Class A EVPs out of that place in one night. Most paranormal investigators tell you you're lucky to get one Class A EVP in your entire career. He got 136 in one night, and so we're like, obviously these can't all be as good as he says they are. He played every clip for us, and every clip we were like, yep, that's exactly what we're hearing. And this one he caught in the basement on his handheld recorder. So here's what we think is being said. Hey Ashford, I killed Grandpa, Ash. I just knew that you'd feel the pain. You can consider it a gift. So I'm going to play it again with it on the screen, and we'll kind of follow the bouncing ball. So we did a little bit of research into this. We couldn't find any Ashford. We couldn't find any Ash, any Grandpa, anybody that was killed. But then again, back in those days, they might not have kept records of all that stuff too. So we can't say for sure that there was anything there, but I can also tell you this is the most negative thing we've ever gotten. There's also a video that we captured that same night. There's a room where they used to have the tavern supplies, where they now keep a bunch of antique And they had a bunch of dolls there as well. And we caught an interesting orb on film. Now, I don't believe in orbs. I will tell you 99% of the orbs are dust, moisture, or bugs. But this one follows a direct, straight path into one of the dolls and disappears. So I'm going to put this up there for you to see. You're going to watch over in this area. So look right around here, it's going to flutter in, and then head toward those dolls. There it is. Kind of flutters in, heads toward the dolls, and disappears. You want to see a closer look at that?
Yes.
A closer look. Thank you. So kind of watch right around here. There it is. So if it's dust, if it's a bug, it would be kind of like fluttering all around. Want to see that again? Again. And so Andy Lake, who caught this. How many people remember Art Lake, the weatherman from Channel 10?
You bet.
And so Andy Lake, one of my best friends, is his son. And he's a paranormal investigator who does a lot of this work with us. And he captured that bit of evidence, and he named it Tinkerbell. So now let's move on to a place that's probably considered to be the most haunted place around the South Coast. Lizzie Borden. So this place I've investigated dozens of times. And I've had a lot of interesting things that have come out of this. I've been sweared at, I've been growled at, I've been thrown up against the wall, I've been thrown up the stairs, I've been thrown down the stairs, I've been choked, I've been scratched. And that was just from the people that weren't there. There's a lot of weird things that happen over the years, but we caught some interesting stuff. And I pulled one bit of evidence, mainly because I like to keep this presentation all ages, so I don't have the ones where they swear at me. But this one I like because we think we might have caught the voice of Lizzie Borden herself. And this was actually captured by, the night we were doing this investigation, we had Luann Jolly of Whaling City Ghosts with us. So a New Bedford person, one of the first listeners of Spooky Southcoast back in the day, she was with us and she captured this on her recorder. We were all in Lizzie Borden's bedroom. The recorder was on the bed, and you hear this voice come from down the hallway. But back in those days, we had our own key to get in, and we would go in and let ourselves in when there was nobody else around, lock up behind us, we would investigate, and then lock up when we left. At the time, the person who was the manager, Leanne, she never even bothered to come while we were there. She knew we were there, she let us do our thing. Nobody would have come in, but yet this voice comes from down the hall. And I'm going to play it for you, and then I'll tell you what we think is being said. So you hear this voice, a female voice that has to it. And this is what we think is being said. But I'm a good note. And that's why I think it might be Lizzie Borden herself. Now, what does this mean? It could mean I couldn't have possibly have murdered them. I'm a good daughter. Or it could have been, I did it, but I'm a good daughter. I was kind of driven to have to do it. So I'm going to play it again with it on the screen. So they actually ended up using that in the Curse of Lizzie Borden shock doc special that was on Travel Channel and Discovery Plus. They kind of framed it as they got it that night on the investigation, but Luann had actually captured that years ago with us. That same night, this place really lit up for us. That was the night that I was thrown up against the wall. But that same night, we also captured a bit of video footage. On the third floor, and this is now a point of contention between the Lizzie Borden house and the haunted coffee shop next door, because the ghosts that were thought to be haunting the third floor bedroom were of the children who were actually murdered next door. So that's just one of the stories, one of the people, one of the ghosts that they think might be causing the phenomena that goes on up there. But this particular night, we had a camera set up on top of the toy chest that's up there. And this is 2007, I think, so we're talking about an IR camera that's hardwired into a DVR system with a heavy pedestal base to it. and it's not moving anywhere. We taped all the cords against the wall so nobody would trip in the dark, but yet what you're going to see is, as you're watching this, you're going to see it move, not just once, but twice. And you'll hear somebody ask if it was Michael, who was the former caretaker of the house, who was sent to haunt that room. People that are asking if it's the children that moved it. But I can tell you that we've had experiences in that room. I've had my legs lifted up off the bed. There's something that has more power than what could just be a couple of kids, assuming that kid goes to be limited to, kids' earthly strength. Oh, how about I start it? That would be helpful. There we go. So yeah, 2007. And everything that I just told you is now going to show up on the screen because I didn't do it. So it's going to move right at the beginning of it. So it kind of just shifts over to the left. And then the investigators realize that it's moved. And so they're trying to figure out what might have made it move. You're going to see a lot of those quote-unquote orbs. Those are just bugs. They left the door open and there were all kinds of mosquitoes in there. So the way it resets the camera.
I moved that time. Is that good? I moved that time.
So now when you're investigating, if something that you think is anomalous happens, the first thing you want to do is you want to try to debunk it, you want to try to figure out what caused it. So everybody's like stomping on the floor, they're kicking the wire against the wall, they're trying to see if something that they did might have caused that camera to move. So now that we've talked about hunting for ghosts and going out there and investigating the paranormal, how many people want to go out and do it?
Done.
Well, it just so happens we've got a couple of events coming up where you can do just that. So I'll cover paranormal events here. On Friday night, Friday the 13th, we will be investigating in Sandwich, Massachusetts. It is the 1675 Epoxy House, which is a beautiful building. It looks just like it would have in the 1600s. Nobody's ever investigated either of these two buildings before, so this will be the first time. And when I say nobody, I mean I haven't even walked through yet with a device to it. I just took a tour. I took a historical tour of the Epoxy House, and then the Wing School, which is kind of across the street, down the street a little bit. That was actually the school where I went to 6th grade for a few months. I moved to Sandwich at the beginning of 6th grade, and it just so happened they opened 2 new elementary schools later that year. So until about February, I went to school there, and then they moved us to the new place. But I knew going to that school that it was haunted, way back in 6th grade. And so now we get the chance to actually investigate it and see if that's true. The people who work there now, because the school is shut down, it's no longer a school, but they use some of the space for town auxiliary offices. So there are people that work in the building, and they were telling us about all the different anomalous phenomena that would happen. So I'm really hoping that going there and investigating it and looking for it will draw some stuff out, including my old classroom. We get to be in my old classroom, which I'm psyched about. The event is 21 plus. Tickets are on sale. You can scan that code if you want to get them, or you can go to the website and get them, and this is on social media. It is being sponsored by In Good Health, which is a recreational cannabis company. But just know that even if they're there, even if they decide to hand out free samples, we don't allow any partaking in that before investigation. So
You sure it's just that ticket price?
I'm sorry?
Is that a joke? It's $80 for a ticket?
Nope, that's the ticket price. So a long time ago,
I can't believe it. I can't believe it.
we're already mostly sold out. What's interesting about it?
Suck the board every minute.
What's interesting about it is that if you set the price too low, what happens is you get a bunch of people that are coming in and aren't taking you seriously. So if I was like, all right, $5 for a ticket, then people come in, they don't care about if they're going to get thrown out, they'll act like asses, and then they ruin it for everybody else. If you charge an amount that makes it so that people don't feel like they've actually paid to be there and invested something, then it makes a difference. The other part of it is, the money that's raised with these, it's not like it goes into people's pockets. It goes back to keeping these places alive. And if you look at a place like the Oliver Estate in Middleborough, this was a place that was falling apart. The town owned it, they didn't know what to do with it. They started letting ghost investigations happen there, and they were able to raise enough money that they put a new roof on it, they completely refurbished it, they put running water back in, so now you can use the toilet inside instead of using porta potty outside. And now the town of Weymouth, which owns the Emery Estate, which we'll get to in a second, they've asked for the people that run the Oliver Estate to do the same thing there, to help them save this historic building. So, and especially with COVID coming through and kind of wiping out a lot of the historic tours that people were doing of some of these haunted places, the paranormal is what really brings them in. The Fearing Tavern in Wareham, every 5th grade school kid takes a field trip there, and every 5th grade school kid hated that day, because it's so boring. You're going to go walk through an old house and listen to the tour guide. But now when they go online and they look it up, they realize, because of all the stuff we posted over the years of investigating there, that there are ghosts there, and that's bringing them to them. It's bringing new people and new revenue in there. So a lot of the places that have embraced this have seen the economic result of it. By putting on ghost tours, the Mark Twain House was famous for this. When we approached them about doing an event there, they're like, we're the Mark Twain House. We don't do that kind of thing. And we said, okay, well, if you ever change your mind, they said, we'll let you try it and see how it works. So we came in, we did our thing. We charge $99 a ticket. And for that price, we give you dinner, we give you snacks and drinks and everything, and the equipment and all that. And so we did that event, and the Mark Twain House loved it. They said, wow, this was really great. And we said, great, we'd love to come back and do it again. And it's like, yeah, we'll be in touch. Well, a month later, they put up a thing, they were doing their own ghost events. Basically copied the formula that we did, which is fine, whatever. But now they've been doing them themselves multiple times a year ever since, and it's brought in a whole new revenue stream for them. So if you don't charge enough, you get knuckleheads. If you charge too much, then it prices people out. But if you find that sweet spot of where it will benefit people, it'll benefit the location, but it'll also make people take it seriously, then you're doing all right for yourself. We're also doing an event out in Michigan at the Eloise Asylum, which until a few weeks ago I had never actually heard of before. Stephanie, who's up here, and Scott, her boyfriend, and co-investigator. I'm not supposed to tell anybody all the details. They have a TV show coming out like any day now. And I'm not saying that they might have investigated this place as part of that. All I know is they went out there to Michigan without me, and I don't know what went on. But they investigated the Eloise Asylum. And so Stephanie wanted to do an event out there, and she asked me if I wanted to join in. And I said, sure, I've never heard of the place, but sure. That was on a Friday morning. That Friday afternoon, I went and spoke to the Lakeville Senior Center, giving them a presentation on the Bridgewater Triangle. And at the end of the presentation, I packed up all my stuff, and I'm getting ready to walk out the door, and as I'm going out the door, a woman grabs my arm and says, before you go, I just have to ask you, have you ever looked into the Eloise Asylum? And I was like, why would you say that to me right now? And she's like, well, it's just something I've been interested in, and I've been looking into it more. It's like, it's just so weird that I was just having this conversation, and I had never heard of it before. So I called Stephanie when I was in the car, and she's like, yeah, get used to it. Now that you're interested in it, it's going to be reaching out to you more and more. Like, that can't be true. A week later, I'm hosting my morning radio show on WBSM, not talking about ghosts at all, and a guy calls up and says, hey, I know this is off topic, but I gotta ask you, what do you think about the Eloise Asylum? So I'm like, all right, now things are getting really, really weird. So now I get to go there in November and see it for myself, and then probably have it, on my night list. And then I mentioned the Emery Estate in Weymouth. This is a place that, again, it doesn't look nearly as good as it does in this photo. My friend Frank Grace, who lives in Acushnet, takes all these amazing photos. You've probably seen his photos of the Orpheum Theater and other places around Bedford. He really kind of doctored it up to make it look better than it does right now, because it is in need of a lot of renovation. And they're using the paranormal as a way to raise the money to do that. And this is a place that was built after Mount Vernon, George Washington's home. And the family that lived there was very religious. They were followers of Reverend Billy Graham, and in fact, Reverend Billy Graham has stayed in that house multiple times. And when the last member of the Emery family died, they had already given the land that sits on to the town the town ended up buying the mansion, and now they're trying to refurbish it so they can use it for a variety of different things. But we have had so many great experiences there. The last time that I was there, we were getting voices coming through that were giving us a religious sermon in the Billy Graham room. We're getting all of this religious-based stuff, and we weren't getting that anywhere else in the house. But yet we go in the Billy Graham room and it's coming through. It just seems so odd. And then after everybody went home for the night, I'm talking with Christy who runs the stuff over there, and we're just sitting in the living room talking, and all of a sudden one of the shades in the window just goes, which, you know, okay, that happens. But then the other caretaker, Rick, and I were walking around because we heard some voices upstairs, and we would go up to the second floor and then hear people walking on the third floor. Now, nobody else was in the building but Rick, Christy, and myself, and we're hearing all these voices and all these footsteps. Finally, we get ready to leave about an hour after all this started, and as we're getting ready to leave and go down the stairs, Rick hears a voice that says, "Close the door!" And he goes over and he closes the door to the second floor sun porch. And then when he closes the door, I heard a female voice say, "Thank you." So they're appreciative of what we're doing over there. And this is going to be our Christmas event for the year. Last year I started trying to do an investigation in December because I'd never done one in December, so I want to see if it was different energy, different feel, different approach. And so this is going to be our way of kind of getting one more event written on the books this year to help Memory Estate. And then of course we'll go back there again and again because it really is a fascinating place. And because we want to do good. We want to keep these places alive. So if you want to join in any of those, you can always go to SpookySouthcoast.com to get more info. And here's where you can follow me. Again, thank you all for coming out and listening to me ramble about ghosts.
You
And
take any questions?
I will take questions. I was just going to ask them to